Hello, everybody, and welcome back to yet another fun festival roundup episode of The Cup, brought to you by Cup of Hemlock Theatre. I am your host and co-artistic producer, Mackenzie, and you are once again joining the Golden Trio as we dive into yet another fun theater festival. This time it is Next Stage by Toronto Fringe. And joining me on this venture is, of course, my co-artistic producer, Mr. Ryan Borochovitz. Hello, Ryan.
Hello, Mac. Happy to be here.
Yes, happy to have you back on board. Welcome into the 200s.
Yes.
What is your cup drink today?
I have orange
Words.
pico. I have orange pico tea in my The Cup. Hey, that's the show. How about you? Or Jill next if you want.
I am drinking some diet cranberry candy dry ginger ale. That's 'tis the season.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Right? And then, of course, we have our wonderful co-artistic producer, Ms. Jillian Robinson. Hello, Jill.
Hello.
How goes it? What is your ensemble today? What is in your cup?
My ensemble, honestly, is just, I guess it's giving theater blacks today.
I think so.
Yeah,
We're
for the recording. I just got done with my job, which is serving at a brunch restaurant, and I'm about to see another show tonight. So we are just neutral, ready to go, ready to record. We're ready and drinking water to stay hydrated because today is a busy, busy day. This whole month is very busy, packed with seeing wonderful shows, doing wonderful things. Happy to be here and to discuss Next Stage.
Wonderful. And right off the bat, this is a two-part festival roundup. The three shows we're covering in this episode are The Noose, Was Unbecoming Then, and Gemini. So just as a fair warning to everybody, these thoughts and conversations may contain spoilers. So if you have not seen them and you are looking forward to seeing them in its closing week, then please save us, put us on your watch later list on YouTube and come on back to us, or save us in your podcast feed. But other than that, we are so happy to be talking about these three wonderful plays that we'll be discussing today. And first off the bat, we have The Noose, presented by Abigail Whitney Productions, directed and produced by Abigail Whitney, written by Pèlin-tèt. Wonderful. And Ryan, since you always give us such wonderful, succinct elevator pitch summaries, give us your elevator pitch of the show.
Okay, yeah. So this is a show that I think has certainly found its moment, probably by accident, because it's about two Haitian immigrants living in the United States. And contrary to what Trump and Vance would have you believe, they're not eating the dogs, but they might almost eat some dog food. So, yeah. So this is about two characters, Polydor, played by our good friend and co-founder of Cup of Hemlock, Edmund Clark. Always happy to see Ed on stage. Mm-hmm. And Luco Saint Fleur as Piram. So these are two men. They're both immigrants from Haiti who are living in New York. I should also mention that this show was originally written in 1978, so it is a new production of an old play by someone who is a well-known and well-regarded writer from Haiti who is still alive. So this is a piece that's really about these two men who come from very different walks of life, kind of being neutralized in their circumstances in this dingy basement apartment where we see them for the entirety of the show. We never do get to see them leave. They're stuck together. They have different views of the world, ideologies, social relations. One of them seems to be more so from an ousted intellectual class or political elite, and the other is here as a laborer sending money back to his large extended family. And yeah, it's really just about the struggles for survival in this new milieu, understanding themselves, each other, finding common ground, struggling to find common ground. And as far as plot summaries go, I think I'm inclined to leave it there. This is an interesting
that's
play.
Great.
That's a good spot to round out on.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Jill, what are your thoughts on this show?
Yeah. This show was phenomenal in my eyes, and I'm very, very glad that they are going to have a life in Ottawa and New York with this show. It's touring to those locations, and I think I shared with Ryan when we saw it. This is a very broad sort of overview, but to me, it made me think about Top Dog Underdog and Of Mice and Men. I could probably give more examples of great literature where there are two different men coming from similar backgrounds, but living very different lives. And I think this production like absolutely hit the mark with the sort of duality and how do I say this? Like, it's like similarity, but also opposition of the men. And I think that was reflected in the set. It was reflected in the gestures that our actors used, and also the way in which they said their lines. To touch on each of those thoughts there, I loved our set was kind of like an intimate, it was in the chamber space at Buddies in Bad Time, but how it was kind of just like a panel that showed us the two sides of this basement apartment, and both sides of the apartment were garnished according to the character. So Polydor's was very like neat and tidy, sort of more business-esque. And then Piram's was a little bit more disheveled, posters on the walls. And so I just thought right off the hop, it was very obvious whose space was which. And when the characters sort of contaminated each other's spaces, it added a layer of tension there, which again, just fed really beautifully into the narrative. And then I want to talk about the gesturing and the dialogue that both characters were, and both actors brought to the table for these characters. So Luco St. Fleur as Piram, just like the way that he sort of like commanded the space, high status, big, large gestures, and the pace of his text was you had to keep up with him. And then in contrast to Edmund's sort of slow, methodic gesturing and very like poetic, delicate texture of the words. Again, just using, I say this a lot on our episodes, but using the elements of theater to really add so many layers to character, to narrative. It just, to me, all of that was the perfect recipe to the final scene of the two of them dealing with the noose and deciding to come together before they both fall apart, if that makes sense. Yeah, I feel like that was kind of like, I talked about set there, I talked about gesturing. I think I'll leave my thoughts for now there if one of you want to snowball off of that.
Ryan?
Stew.
Yeah, like there's all kinds of things I could say. Yeah, I think 100% you're right about the way that Ed's classical acting style that we're all very familiar with. He was the Pastor Manders opposite your Mrs. Alving. He was Napoleon opposite your bumbling Lieutenant Mac. That, we all know the sort of uniqueness of the training and the way that Ed approaches text that I think is so perfectly suited to this character, who is an out-of-place intellectual who really intellectualizes all of his thoughts, every gesture. Nothing is without some sort of kind of cerebral motor behind it. And then opposite of Luco's more freewheeling, less rigid naturalism. Like, I think, it was the perfect dynamic, perfect role for both of them. This is so well cast.
Yeah.
The script itself, I think, could use some tightening. And because it is a 46-year-old play by a living author, I'm sure they didn't have a lot of freedom to do that in this production. But there are some things that, like, I do think maybe get a little repetitive. These characters have been living together for 3 years, and you'd think they'd have had a lot of these conversations already at some point, that they would know more about each other, but it seems like they're learning a lot for the first time after so long. So again, there's things like that by the time we get to the end, it does really pack a big punch, and I wouldn't change a thing about any of that. I have kind of interesting thoughts about the title, because the original title in Haitian Creole is Pèlin-tèt. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, which, if Google Translate can be trusted, literally translates to pearl head, which maybe also means noose, or is the kind of configuration of words for noose, unclear. If so, Google Translate didn't present that as an option when I looked it up. But I think the title of the noose is fascinating, because it takes a long time before an actual noose becomes prominently featured within the play. So you spend, or at least I spent, most of the play wondering and worrying how exactly that is going to wind up being an appropriately relevant title. And there is this hanging light bulb the entire time. So knowing that it's called that, your eye kind of does gravitate towards that. And then when we do kind of find out how the noose does enter the scene very end, and the larger metaphorical connotations that come with it, I think it is an appropriate title, and it's one that keeps you on edge until it gives you something meaningful to think about, which is like an interesting source of tension and profundity. So lots of great stuff here. How about you, Matt? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I'll piggyback on both of you. I thought this was a very solid piece of the festival, a very good two-hand play, which, as we all know, it's a very hard thing to actually do. And I thought Ed and Luco, I thought they had great chemistry together. The ribbing that they had there, like I went on both sides of them, because sometimes I'm like, Luco's such a horrible Priam's such a horrible roommate. Like, but then by the end, when like it's revealed what's in the voodoo doll, and you realize the bigger thing that's been going on, and Polydor's character being undocumented, like all that, it really does. It's a very 70s style play where things happen, but it's a very slow burn. Where sometimes you're like, where is this going? What are we doing?
It feels like Haitian Sam Shepard.
Yeah.
Very 70s. Yeah.
Yes,
Sorry, continue.
exactly. Where you're just kind of like, what is going on here? Like, what am I building toward? But then at the end, you're like, it all like cooked into that stew pot together and came out beautiful.
Yeah.
So I thought it was very well done. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And as Jill said, I'm very happy it's going on tour. Like, I wish more Canadian shows were able to go out on tour. Like, I think all three of the plays we'll be discussing today could easily go out on tour and have success on the road. And I mean, I just wish. I mean, this is a bigger editorial conversation about Canadian theater infrastructure and the flaws within it. But it is good to see this play getting a life and this play getting a resurgence.
Yeah.
Because as you said, unfortunately, due to horrible politicians, they have really brought back this viewpoint of immigration that is just not right. And yeah, so. And the fact that, Ryan, the fact that the fact we even get dog food in the play, and we have Trump's infamous line from the debate of, they're eating the dogs. It's,
like I'm sure this was programmed before then,
yes.
like and obviously was written decades before like all of this, but just the fact that
it's ironic.
Yeah, like I haven't read anyone else's reviews for this yet. We're recording this pretty early in the festival, but like I would be surprised if we're the only people to think of that, because it just feels like it's hanging in the air over this.
Yes.
I want to add a little bit more to talking back to like the theatrical elements and talking about hanging in the air. Yeah, Ryan, the idea, like the theater light that was hanging as their like sort of kitchen light, the fact that was used like as the noose, again, such a beautiful use of theater element there. And then that kind of strings us to my other thought of, I thought the direction of bringing some of the dialogue right smack down front, like almost like on top of the audience, center stage. Like, I just thought there was a very vulnerable, like the fourth wall is still there, but it was a very vulnerable sort of like, almost like the characters were pushing through saran wrap onto the audience. I don't know if that's like a weird thing, but
like a membrane.
Yeah. So like that was the foreground. We had our hanging theater light in the middle. And then I do want to talk about the soundscape of what was happening outside of the apartment. We got sounds of like girls laughing, or the characters mention with like the pipes, there's like plumbing sounds and everything. So I just think, again, as both of these characters kind of tying back to the plot, they're striving towards what the American dream is, the fact that we get to hear it, but we don't get to see it. I think, again, there's another layer of, these characters kind of being trapped in this sort of lower level environment. Like, so,
they're literally underground. They're the underground men. Yeah.
And I thought just like when the sounds came in, like punctured through to the text, I thought it was beautifully, again, that would have been with the sound designer and the director sewing in when those happen, or even in the script, if that's in the stage directions. Again, I just thought it was at the appropriate time. And I just wanted to mention that.
Wonderful.
Okay. That's
all right.
The news.
The next one. Let's do it.
Yeah.
The next one was I Was Unbecoming Then. Book and lyrics by Lindsay Bourne. Music written by Sam Castida and directed by Alana Cahin. And music direction by Alexa Belgrave. So this is a fun musical piece to sandwich between our two plays. So Ryan, summarize this adventure into the realm of High School Musicals for us.
Yeah, well, it's not High School Musical, that's for sure.
No.
It's high school students singing songs. They're in a choir together. This one features a very large 12 cast of all female and non-binary performers, female presenting non-binary performers. And they're in a choir together. They're a high school choir. I believe it's said that it's set in like 2005, 2006. The only kind of like overt indication we have of that is one character has a pink Motorola flip phone, and maybe there's a few other kind of references peppered in here and there to things that are specifically of that era, but it is kind of, it is and is not a period piece in that way. So we have just kind of the inner thoughts and personal dramas of all of these young female presenting individuals in a choir together. And, there's a lot of kind of raunchy stuff. I think like hormones and harmonies was a term that was used in the marketing copy for this. Yeah, the sex and scat kind of appears throughout, all descriptive, none of it graphically presented on stage. They have a lot of complicated feelings about their choir director, Bruce, and assistant
and
choir
Ted.
director. Yeah, what was Ted's title exactly? Was he like
I think he's like
choir
assistant
director?
choir director. He also directs like the musicals.
Yeah.
He rides a motorbike.
He does ride a motorbike. He's the cool teacher. Maybe he'll adopt the kid from Boy Meets World. So
hopefully not, judging by his track record of the show.
Yes, it is very much deconstructing the idea of these kind of cool teachers who are very close with their students and what may or may not be inappropriate about that. And this is kind of, I feel like there's no other way to sort of talk about the plot of this play, but like, it's the wolves, right? This is just Sarah DeLap's The Wolves, but
Jill has a great
soccer.
response to that.
It's the Wolves and Glee had a kid.
Sure.
That's what it is.
That's good. But like my kind of big thought about this, and then I'll lob it over to you both about like in terms of deeper commentary, but like this play is so similar to The Wolves that I feel like there's honestly only two ways you could possibly write a play like this. One is you're actively trying to mimic The Wolves, or two, you've legitimately never heard of The Wolves and you'd be shocked to find out that what you've written is very similar to this very famous play. I have a hard time kind of imagining any middle ground between those two poles. If you're aware of it but not actively mimicking it, then at some point you must have noticed what was happening. I don't know. It's like if The Wolves contained a lot more scenes of actually playing soccer, it would be kind of this play, because the singing itself it markets itself as a bit of a musical, but it's kind of singing interludes in a lot of way, which is very theatrical and good performances. I have more thoughts about that I could get to soon, but yeah, I'm struggling with how similar this is to another very famous play, and I'm kind of just chewing on what uniquely this play is doing that one doesn't. Maybe you both have thoughts on that. But feel free to take it in any direction.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a stab at it first, is because I did do choir in high school.
Same Z's.
Right, Jill, you and me. I mean, were you also the music office administrator as well?
I was the music department president.
There you go, and I was vice president. So there you go. You and I both. So there was a lot of like.
Are we surprised?
Not at all. But like watching this play, I was getting like I was getting so many like itching flashbacks of like similar combos where it's like they're not going to survive without me. Like did you photocopy the papers and like get everything done there? And like I will say I did not have my choir director's phone number. So
me neither. Yeah,
that got a little weird. But I definitely was very close with both the orchestra and the choir directors, both of them together. And that paid off in a lot of good benefits with a desk in the music office and all the little fun perks that come with being a good, helpful student. So just there was so much relatability in this that I was like, now, mind you, many of the female elements of the piece that were like more female driven that I could not relate to, but I definitely empathized with. And what I liked about this play was that it didn't pull any punches, because so many times when teenage girls are written and performed, they are written as very demure, very restrained. Pardon?
It's very mindful.
Mindful,
sorry.
Sure, mindful.
Okay, yeah, sorry, continue.
Yeah.
No, he's making a meme joke. Very demure, very mindful.
Good job, Ryan. Good job.
Is it though? Sorry, continue.
Anyway, so what I was happy to see, and The Wolves does this too, which is why I thought of The Wolves as well, is that it takes the sheen off it. It makes them human. Where girls talk about sex and sexuality just as much as any of the boys do. That is not something exclusive to hormonal teenage boys. That is something that both parties, talk about and have strong feelings about. And it's one of those things where like there's a great monologue all about the trigonometry teacher, which was so funny. And just the follow-up punchline after that of, well, I failed that test was great. But like it's just that raunchy human humor that was infused into all these characters like it felt like a better version of Degrassi, where like Degrassi
Mhm.
put it very high school soap opera-y, and this had some vibes of that, but once again, it felt human. It didn't feel like these characters were playing archetypes. It felt like, no, these are all people who have multifacets, who, work on multi different levels and aren't like, just the stereotypical good student, the sexy student, the gay student, that type of thing there, where like a lot of times when you're writing a big ensemble piece, you'll pigeonhole characters to kind of just write them off and kind of be like, okay, that's your stereotype done, moving on to the next. This is like,
Mhm.
no, each one of these characters is going to have moments of sexuality meets, struggles in classes. Like each one of them are like, it was very human piece. And I did enjoy that. And
Yep.
also the singing and the harmonies, stunning. Like Jill, I know you have perfect pitch, so you may be able to lead more into how on pitch the singers were. But as someone who did not have perfect pitch, but sang in choirs, I
Phenomenal.
thoroughly enjoyed listening to those choral arrangements and really
Yep.
enjoying the music of the show. So
Mhm.
overall, I thought it was a very solid, enjoyable piece. Jill, as our fellow choir member, what were your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Okay, so right at the top of me diving in, I have the great honor, or I've had the great honor of performing alongside many of these actors in various pieces.
Mhm.
And this entire cast is absolutely flawless vocally and are phenomenal performers. So I just want to shower my praise on all of these wonderful folks that I have shared the stage with. And it was so lovely to just be in the audience and just soak in their talents. Yes. Okay. Extremely relatable. Pretty much every pop out monologue, I either have had that discussion as a kid or have like had that sort of experience with my fellow gal pals. This was a very finally good description, great sort of unveiling of, yeah, girls, women, ladies at that age. Those are the thoughts we have. Those are the conversations. Those are the awkwardness, the thinking you're going too far, thinking you're not doing enough. Pepper in boys there, pepper in grades, pepper in this piece, the looming sort of tension that can occur with teachers, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I just thought, yeah, what a real depiction. And I want to kind of reframe, both of you said like raunchy. Yes, I think the monologues were very bare and naked, but I want to change that narrative of raunchy. I think it's just girls at that time talking about their bodies, talking about their experiences. Yeah, I want to unladylike that sort of
I love it.
description, because I think, yeah, more girls at that age should feel free to chat about things that way. Yes, musically so tight. And again, I think the pulse in which music sort of came in. This piece is very devised. Like, to
Mhm.
me overall, right? It's, we have sort of the transitions are choral pieces mixed in with some like lovely kind of like pose-esque choreography, and then the monologues sort of punch in and we get to see each girl's individuality, but then also how they are all the altos and tenors and mezzos that create this
Mhm.
section of the school choir. So yeah, I just thought like the pulse in which the songs came in alongside the monologues was a beautiful marriage there. I was on the edge of my seat through most of it because it was devised and we really did get to like see each girl sort of express who they are and share a little bit about their lives. I was like, okay, like where is the narrative going? Like, is this just going
Mhm.
to be a display of women at this age in a choir, which again, beautiful. And I could have ended there just right there. But then once we started hearing more about Bruce and more about these teachers and more about the Banff trip, which is what they're all sort of practicing for,
Mhm.
again, it was like adding in all of that narrative, I think just kind of rounded out the show a bit more for me, which was great.
All right, awesome, Jill. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a very devised piece. It kind of has that verbatim vibe to it. It kind of felt also like a bit like a documentary style piece where it didn't quite have like a linear plot. It almost feels a bit like like the early versions of A Chorus Line, if you know that musical, where all
Yes.
the actors got brought into a studio room with a tape recorder, and the director just pitched out different topics like your first dance experience, your first sexual awakening experience, your worst audition story experience. And basically him and the writers then listened to all those stories and then crafted it into a show under the guise of a basic set piece of actors showing up to an audition.
If I could add to just kind of what you were saying, I almost kind of wanted each of these characters, like it seemed like I wanted there to be like a TV series or something, or like episodes, because again we got like a flavor of each of these characters and like really enough to round out each of them. And I kind of wanted to see almost like like a TV series where like maybe each episode is called like Joey or like Ashley, you know what I mean? Like, and we have like each girl has their own episode and we kind
almost
of follow
like 13 Reasons Why.
Sure. I haven't seen that series, but yeah.
But if it's like that, then just like that.
Very similar, very similar.
Anyway, sorry, back to you, Matt. Yeah.
No, that's basically what I was just saying. Like, it had that similar DT vibe to it, and so that's kind of Ryan, I mean, Jill and I have talked a lot about this. Were you in school choir?
No. Jill's laughing because I can't.
It's like, wait, no.
No, I was never in choir. I don't think you need to have been in choir to get what this piece is doing and to relate to what the characters are talking about. Yeah, like I think to me, I have like a lot of kind of like weird sort of fragmentary thoughts, so bear with me as I try to spill them out.
It's a fragmentary piece.
So it is, so it is appropriate. The form meets content. I will completely 100% co-sign everything you said about how just like great the singing is, how beautiful it sounded. If these 12 performers formed an actual choir and like didn't even have any of the story and the inner monologue and dialogue, I would pay to see a choir show of just them singing. They're fantastic. Mm-hmm. Where I kind of err a bit on this piece is all the things that aren't the singing, unfortunately. And not because, like, I think it's well written, it's well kind of composed. I think the stories and the dynamics between the characters are interesting. All of the breaks for monologues, like, I believe that's a real thought that a young woman or a young non-binary person might have. But to me, I guess there wasn't enough feeling like there was differentiation between the characters. You two have said that it kind of has like a devised theater type feel to it. And I would honestly, if you had told me that this play was written by like the lines just being pulled randomly out of a hat and being like, which actor wants this one? There you go, you can have it. It doesn't really feel like, in most cases to me, like these are coherently, fully drawn out characters. Now, the individual actors might tell me that, like, no, like, if let me lay out everything that my character says and it all is pretty coherent. I believe that's probably the case, but the whole thing kind of blended together the way it is in the performance. I don't feel like as an audience member, I got the sense. I think The Wolves does that very well, that you could watch the play from each character's perspective and get a complete story of that character's perspective that's very consistent. This one, each character gets their moments, but I think very few, if any of them, get a story. And I think this play it's trying to do something very interesting structurally. I would kind of liken it to the Carol Churchill anti-Freytag female orgasm type of plot structure. And I love that. And I love experimentations with that kind of thing. But you would think then that there would be multiple climaxes to kind of pursue that metaphor, whereas I kind of feel like there weren't any climaxes, and maybe...
there was the collective one. Sorry, there was the one where they were all doing it, but go ahead.
Okay, yeah, like maybe. To me, I almost kind of wanted to be generous and say that the lack of climaxes is maybe a commentary on the sex lives of teenage girls who maybe don't get to have the kind of satisfaction that they hope for in a way that they describe some of their sexual encounters in this piece. Like, I'm like, that is maybe clever, but to me, like, I don't really feel like there were arcs, and they don't have to be Freytag pyramid shaped arcs, but I do kind of expect some sort of feelings of narrative moments of satisfaction, and to me I think that was kind of lacking. I will also just say, in terms of the differentiation between characters, in my mind most of these characters remain completely nameless. They have names, and if you look at the program, which I didn't do until after I watched the performance, all of them have names, but the way that the proper names are used throughout the piece, aside from the obvious Bruce and Ted, who are characters who we get told about but never see often, I was never certain which character was being referred to when a proper name is used. They mentioned Daisy many times, probably more than any other girl in the show. And it wasn't until I read the program later that I realized that was Hee-yeon Park's character. They're like, oh, she's Daisy. That kind of now makes sense when I remember how the word Daisy was used throughout this show, but I couldn't have possibly gotten that from, I don't think there was ever a moment where someone said Daisy looking at her, so I knew that's who was Daisy. Laura was definitely Joey. That was the only
Yeah.
one that I was certain of. But most of these characters are kind of just became, we lacked characterization, and that's why I think that feeling of that line could have been said by any of the characters. That line could have also been said with very few exceptions. I kind of just think that we're lacking distinctiveness in the voices, and as a result, it kind of just feels like one sort of author voice as opposed to all of these different types of young ladies. That's kind of a big part of where my frustration with this piece came from, because I do think there's a lot of potential to differentiate them. High school girls are not a monolith, and it kind of feel a bit like one in the framing of this piece. Please, Jill.
Can I say, though, on that, not that you're wrong, but it's very indicative of a choir. They're really, unless you are called to be a soloist, you are one voice. So I kind of liked that we got the punch out of names occasionally, but I liked that it was quite, no pun intended, a blend of voices, a blend of names. I think that married really well with, being in choir. Like, that is the number one rule, is you are blending your voice. There's really no punch out unless you have a solo or like a particular harmony that you need to bellow out. Like, so as we get a taste of all of these women or female presenting folks like telling their story, like, they have to remember that you're all following the same, you kind of all have to be in the same container. You have to be in the same chamber. You have to be on the same carpet. That is being a young woman. You are under the same sort of pressure cooker, even though you're all different. And that kind of is segueing me. I just want to chat really quickly and unpack the poster. I thought the poster for this piece was phenomenal. A couple reasons. One, there's the common line that is said where predominantly it's Ashley, the character Ashley, asking for a hair tie. We find out that Ashley is Bruce's favorite. Bruce asks Ashley to sit on his lap. So there's this common thing of, does anyone have a hair tie? Does anyone have a hair? First of all, that is every girl back in the day has said that line like to a friend. That's just like kind of like a rite of passage being like a young woman is, does anyone have a hair tie or do you have a bobby pin? Like, that's just like such a common thing that we all say or said or still say. And the fact that we find out too, that it's anytime Bruce is mentioned, Ashley asks for that hair tie. Woof. That's like, she maybe wants to make herself like put her hair back so she looks a little different, so that maybe she doesn't capture Bruce's attention, or she's uncomfortable and needs to change the way that, like, her stance, so that that hair tie. The idea of the ponytail, that wow, I could write a whole essay of unpacking like the female ponytail, right? There's the action of like pulling on it, right? There's the action of getting your hair away from your face. Hair is a very like lavish, luxurious, sort of like sexy sort of component that we have, is how do women use their hair, letting your hair down. So this idea of the ponytail, like, and then the fact that is their poster, and it's like a kind of like a disheveled, it's kind of just whip your hair back, like, just what a phenomenal symbol to really encapsulate everything that is like a woman in puberty, like. So I just wanted to I wanted to get in my ponytail unpacking there.
No, I think there's a lot there with like the whole hair and points. And I mean, it's such an interesting choice to have. Really, the main kind of through line plot is the death of Ted, and kind of they're followed after that. But yet, it's not really ever fully unpacked. It's kind of sidelined, where it's like, well, it couldn't have happened, really. I mean, he gave other people rides on his motorbike too. Oh, and they were family friends. It's like, it's such an interesting thing that, and then the fact that they bring Bruce into it as well, where it's like, what the hell is going on in this music? I mean, it reminded me. I just watched a mini series on Disney Plus called Betrayal. First season is all about the high school film teacher who was kind of the cool teacher, as it were. But then, it turns out he was, having affairs with women for 10 years behind his wife's back, who was like a newscaster. One of the, one that blew the whistle was this high school student that he ultimately seduced. And so this new teacher gets brought in to take over the class. And one of the first things he goes is like, why are there curtains up covering the windows? And it's like, oh, well, Mr. Mike didn't like being disturbed in his office. It's like, no, he's alone with students in there with the curtain up. Like, Like, it's just those small things that nobody thinks of at the moment. But then when you sit back and go, something's off in this situation here. Like, just her saying that line of, does Bruce ask anybody else to sit on his lap? And you can really hear the whole audience go, like, you can feel the collective tightening of everybody's stomachs at that moment. Because you're like, okay, where are we going now with this? And then it's never fully resolved either. It's like such a fascinating piece there.
Well, because I also just want to kind of like cap out, because we do have to mosey on to the next piece, but like, it's as much as we were like, oh my gosh, look at this collective of female presenting folks telling their story. And like, yes, finally, like women of that, age group telling things the way they tell it. It's all under male gaze. And that's,
it's all
again, it's Bruce, Ted, always. And even the way that the stage is set, it's like they're rolled out onto this white carpet. So they can't really even take up the whole space. They are meant to be on this carpet with these like floodlights. And the piece starts and ends like they are posing for a centerfold in a magazine.
Yes.
And again, I think just, like having the sort of looming male gazedness on top of these rich female, the content and form of femaleness, like it just, really like brilliant on the production side of that.
Agreed. Awesome. Well, let's get into the last play of the first part of our roundup. And it is Gemini, presented by Defiance Theatre, written by Louise Case-Moore and directed by Chantal Hahn and Mitchell Cushman. Ryan, summarize this piece for
All
us.
right. Yes, third time's the charm.
Yeah.
So this
You
is
hit it every time, sir.
This one's an intimate two-hander between two characters, Julie, played by the playwright Louise Case-Moore, and she is a bartender who seems to be the only employee we see in this small town bar. Do we ever determine where this is set? What town it is?
It's in Toronto.
It is Toronto.
Yeah.
They said that.
Yeah, because they said the village.
Okay.
Yes, they bring up a lot of Toronto locations.
Okay, yeah.
They do.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, so small bar in Toronto somewhere. And she is acting opposite treasured Canadian playwright Vern Thiessen in the role of Ben, or Benjamin, fake name. And he is a barfly, for lack of a better word. He is a writer who had an unexpected success with his first book titled Gemini. Hey, that's the name of the play. And it's a book of poetry, right? I think I read somewhere that it was a novel, but I feel like in the play it's definitely poetry. But yeah. So he wrote this book of poetry that kind of got catapulted to unexpected success because some influencer tweeted about it or something. And so now he doesn't need to work. He has more money than he knows what to do with. His wife has perished after a long sort of drawn out illness. So he's kind of not necessarily trying to drink himself to death, but he doesn't know what to do with himself. He doesn't have
He's lonely.
He's lonely, and he doesn't have any creative gumption to maybe write another book. He feels like there's no inspiration. So he just spends his days in this bar chatting up the bartender who's also lonely in the bar. She's going through her own feelings of potential forthcoming grief that her mother is sick and probably going to pass away soon. So they feel like kindred spirits. They're happy to talk to each other and kill the time in their day when there doesn't seem to be anybody else in this bar. So we might as well talk and we might as well be friends because we're both here, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the thrust of the play, it sort of has this non-linear plot structure of we're set in the present at the beginning, bookending scenes with a poetry reading that he's doing at this bar. And we could tell something's off in his relationship with the bartender, that some sort of tension has come between them. But then we flash back to these scenes of various other times during their long friendship where they seem to get on like thieves and they have all these fun conversations. So you're watching it thinking, okay, what's going to happen that's going to get us to here? Maybe you can predict what that thing will be. Maybe you can't. That is entirely in the eye of the beholder. And that it is about the kind of awkward dynamics between people who are your friend, who you also pay or get paid by, and how the transactionality of that relationship creates complications and intimacies that are able to form under duress, I think is a good sort of capstone way of putting this as a bit of just like a brief, plot sort of, capsule.
Yeah. Do you want to start us off, Ryan?
Yeah, sure. Okay, why not? So to me, this is a play that feels like it's written in like a Boris Trigorin school of playwriting, as in it's
deep cut there, Ryan, deep cut.
Sure. But it just feels like, I know this is like now multiple iterations of this play have happened. I think the first one was in 2017, but it feels like something that was written over a long period of time, over many years of collecting clever little lines and observations from life, many of which I'm sure probably came from observations working in a bar, and writing them down in a notebook and eventually flipping through that notebook and turning all of that into a play. That's why I use that kind of Siegel reference there. And because a lot of it feels like that, a lot of it is very well structured and kind of has a point, but a lot of it kind of just feels like that's a clever thought you had and you really wanted to get it in here, and doesn't necessarily do much for it, but it does kind of just establish the friendship that's building between these characters, that they have fun banter, and it is all very clever. It succeeds at being clever. I think because it sort of has that janky dramaturgy to it, I think a lot of it just feels kind of clunky structurally, I think. And it's interesting because I feel like in the acting department, Louise, who is the writer, kind of, I think, struggled with the awkwardness of those lines more. It's almost like she's like, here's my clever joke, let me say my clever joke a lot. Whereas I found that Vern Thiessen, who is a playwright that I'm a very big fan of his writing. This is the first time I've seen him act, and you know what? The man can act. But like I said, I'm a big fan of his. Like, I read Einstein's Gift and saw Inhuman Bondage of Soulpepper like within a few months of each other when I was in undergrad, and I consider both of those like formative experiences for the shaping of my artistic tastes. And he has a very good sense of dialogue, both as a writer, and I think he knows how to deliver dialogue like this in the performance. That like he kind of, there's a gregarious is probably the word I would use, but just like a sort of mockeriness to it where everything's played as a joke and kind of works because so many of these lines are jokes, and it kind of like is caked in irony in that way that I think sort of plays really well. There's a few times where he like pretends to be Santa Claus, and I kind of feel like that was almost like a character motivation for his entire performance. Yeah, I have kind of more thoughts that maybe I'll get into in a bit, but I've been talking for a bit, so I'll let one of you two kind of get into it.
Yeah.
Jill? Mac, do you want to? Yeah, sure. I can piggyback off of that. Yeah. Co-signing pretty much like all that you said as well, Ryan. One thing I want to go back on, yes, like in the program, it did list the different iterations of this piece, like, and how like it is had life. I think it was 2017, and then I think it was 2020, and then now. And it's interesting because in the note in the program too, it's inviting sort of like it wants to know what each audience at each time this show is presented, what are their feelings, and it asks the question of like, how do we feel about this relationship, about this piece? We talked about how both these characters are very lonely and they kind of become friends. And I think what was neat about this piece, and I think sometimes we take for granted in watching theater, we think, okay, we're watching this show, we're watching like, where's the tension, what's the climax, where are we going? And one thing I want to like tip my hat to with this piece is it really was just like a raw, organic, like two human beings kind of interwoven in these like poetry readings. But like, I just kind of liked this sort of like naturalistic, we're just learning this relationship of two humans. And yes, they're both lonely in their own ways, and they're both at different stages of their life, both at like, I want to say like turning points of their life, like having Julie at sort of like 30s, sort of like bridging, coming out of the sort of like younger, more carefree years, and then going into like with an ailing parent, and like, what does your future look like? That's a very pivotal sort of like coming of age moment, I guess. And then we have Ben, who is, lost a partner, is sort of at the end of his life, but like wanting to, no pun intended, turning the page, maybe on a new project. So both of these characters are like pining for what their next step in life is, but then they're just sort of like empty vessels to hear each other's story. But I don't ever think they're listening. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think that's in the writing that's rich to me, of like, it's sad, but there's a lot of relationships that we have in life where it's just like, I would like you to listen to this, but then we can go home at the end of the night. Like we can share a drink and then go home at the end of the night, not together necessarily. But so I just wanted to kind of talk about the writing and the sort of deliverance of that with both of our actors. I thought it was a very naturalistic, again, edge of my seat. Where is this going? Is this going somewhere? But pleasantly surprised to just be like, okay, this is this character's turn to discuss what they're going through, and the other one is listening. So again, being an actor too, and also working in the serving industry, like that's very relatable. It's very common. So one thing I do want to talk about through being the audience lens of seeing this production in 2024, the oops that is shared between Ben and Julie. There is a sort of mock New Year's Eve party that they just throw together. Drinks are
She
flowing.
throws it together and invites him to it.
But it's just the two of them basically. And drinks are flowing. Both have had too much to drink. And Ben kisses Julie and, you know, grazes her face and says like, I can take care of you, et cetera, et cetera. And then that happens kind of like fairly far into the piece. So a couple things I want to say is Ryan mentioned how the sort of framing of this piece is kind of like flashbacks and present day. Of the present day moments are this poetry reading that Julie has set up for Ben. And every time we're popped back to this reading, Ben seems inebriated and sort of stumbling through the space. And there's a tension between Julie and Ben. And then when we're thrown back into our past moments, you start to be like, okay, this is Julie. This is Ben. This was their relationship. A sort of like problem I had with the sort of arc of the piece is the New Year's Eve oops happens. And then it's like the staged reading happens like quickly after that. And I think like something that confused me is the pace in which their relationship dissolved. Like, I think we got a lot of like, when we get their history, we get, okay, this is the relationship. And then it's really, really needy, the two of them. And then you get this moment and then it's like instantly they're repelled. And it was a bit jarring for me to kind of go from that moment and then the poetry reading. And I think one of the reasons why it was jarring is because the actual act, the oops act for 2024 wasn't jarring enough, to be honest. And I think, like, again, this isn't even like redirecting the piece, but the kiss happens, the grazing of the face happens. But I almost wanted there to be, and we don't see a lot of this show. So this is already a mechanism that was in place. So this wouldn't be jarring the structure that's already in place, what I'm about to say. We get a lot of, it's the end of this vignette and there's a character that's like turning their back, but then when they turn around, we're into the other vignette. So it's like this character was in this position and then we're just like in a new day in this position. So I kind of wanted, when the physical and sexual altercation happened of just the kiss and just the grazing of the face, I wanted there to be sort of a little bit more viscerality that takes us to the next pace. And even if it's as subtle or as simple as when Julie offers Ben the water, he like looks at her and purposely puts the water away. Or like when they're having a conversation, when she calls the cab, I don't know if it's like a line or if he just stands up from his chair and we segue. I just wanted there to be, especially going from 2017 to 2020 to 2024, I just wanted there to be a little bit more, I guess, viscerality, or like, we don't have to see anything. I don't think it needed it didn't need anything more like intimately coordinated or anything, but just an indicator that something more happened. Because I think when we get to the end of the piece, when we get to the summation of his poetry reading, they're very repelled. Like, they're never near each other. And Julie is very uncomfortable. And I just I wanted there to be a little bit more of an indication that maybe something more happened, or what did happen. I don't know if that's building up to it. Like, what did happen, like, felt more than what we thought at the end.
I have
So,
thoughts,
Ryan?
but sorry, Mac, you haven't said anything yet. Do you want to weigh in before I say my thoughts, or because yeah,
You weigh in first, and then I'll wrap us out.
yeah, like to me, that's not something that I necessarily had a problem with in this piece. What you're describing here, and I think because it's not just that he kissed her and grazed her face; it's he said, "I love you and I can take care of you." And I think that is what is the source of the tension. If he was just like sloppy drunk, kissed her by accident, and then like, oh no, sorry, then yeah, it wouldn't have been anything. But it's when he says those two things, I think that's one, he's saying that like this is how I feel and have basically always felt, and I think you feel that way too. And I think the seeds of that come from the previous scene of her organizing the poetry reading and like the don't be mad, but also it was a lot of work, so please say thank you. And like I think the way the two of them played that scene was fascinating because you could tell on his face that like he hates this idea, he doesn't like it, and yet he doesn't say anything and he accepts it. And because she's saying all these kind of lovely things about how like I love your writing, I see a side of you that's so different when I see you, I want the world to see that. And the way that he just without saying a single word pushes down the knee-jerk I hate this idea to accept it, that I think is the moment he falls in love with her. Maybe he has attraction or infatuation before, but it's just like and it's him thinking that she feels the same way. And then when he follows the I love you with I can take care of you, that is the culmination of all the massive tips he's been giving her this whole time, that he's essentially trying to, in his mind, it's just that I have more money than I know what to do with. You're lonely, I'm lonely. We're basically feel like we're married in this bar. We might as well just be it for real. And then you can not be in this bar and we can have all the same conversations at home and do the crossword puzzle at home. But it is him kind of asserting that dominance that without even realizing it. And the fact that she turns down both of those things, the love that he has for her and the life and protection, financial security that he can offer, that's what turns him into King Baby, essentially. He just like throws a hissy fit, and that's the source of the tension. If he had just been kind of like, oh, sorry, I got different vibes, sorry, we're cool, then I think they could have gone back to normal. But where I think the tension comes from is his bruised ego and his just complete misreading of the situation. Because when he's doing the poetry reading, he says to her, like, I forget the exact line, but it's something to the effect of like, but seriously, I can take care of you. You don't have to like, I mean it. It's like he didn't take the message that night, and I don't think they have had an encounter between that night and the reading, so he's going into
it's all in that same week.
Yeah, so he's going into it thinking that like this is our chance to talk about it. Remember, I'm doing this thing I didn't want to do, which was her expression of love for me. I hear what you're saying, Jill, and I think you're right to notice something's off there, but I think at least the seeds for it have been planted. I don't know.
Maybe just sorry, Mac, and then but maybe it's just like a little bit more flirtation, if you will, or a little bit more of like maybe that's through like a gesturing, or like I needed just a little bit more of like there was clearly a sign for him to say that. You know what I mean? Like, so maybe a little bit more flirtation, a little bit more banter between the two of them so that it opened that can of worms, if you will. And then, that might have kind of like quicken or hit the pace a bit more for me. I don't know, Mac. Get in here.
Mac, what saith you?
I'm more on Ryan's side of it, just because watching the scenes like leading up to the moment, there were so many times where I was watching things going, oh, he like you can easily see this going either way. Either going to be very platonic situation or there's a romance here because this goes on for 3 years. Like this isn't like
in bar time.
Well,
3 years in bar. No, I'm joking. That's just a line of the play.
Because we get that many different bar changes, which is a great running joke of like what's the next door bar changing into. The Cat Cafe is one I would totally visit, but it's the whole thing of they have built this relationship over time, and honestly, I mean, if the play wanted to go a different direction and shown that age isn't always a deterrent in these type of relationships, where sometimes people do connect over personality and just that two souls connect. I could see the play
Mhm.
going in that direction because Louise and Vern had great chemistry with each other.
Yeah.
Them have those conversations about the crossword. I absolutely could see them at like a dining room table on like a Sunday morning, sitting quietly together, having those moments. And I gotta say, Vern's performance after the kiss happens and he breaks down and cries at the table. Like,
Yeah.
I would so appreciate they did not play him as like a slobbering drunk throughout the whole show, that he was a
Mhm.
very human person who was
Yeah.
grieving, who latches on to people who he sees who are lonely like him, because he talks about how the old bartender before Julie took over that position also had that connection with him in some way, which
Mhm.
then makes you
Mhm.
question what happened in that other relationship. Did was there another miscommunication there on that level? Like is he someone who's grieving and lonely and just searching for a connection, and he finds them in these bartenders who on one hand you could read as them being friendly, but on his hand, I absolutely could see a situation where you could misread the signs, and I like that the play had that, where this was a play of misreading signs, where
Mhm.
you easily could take it as a romantic gesture or as a platonic gesture, and but because of the tension that both Louise and Vern brought into those like flash forward scenes or present day scenes,
Yeah.
there was always this gut feeling in the back of my stomach of what's the scene going to be where the bad thing's going to happen, because you knew
Yeah.
that like at some point we're going to go in the wrong direction here and something's going to happen. I was hoping it wasn't going to be the kiss situation. I was hoping it was going to be something more, because they brought up the Chekhov gun of if I let you drive, I'm liable.
Yeah.
Where I was like, okay, we get to the New Year's scene. He's got a sports car. He's driving up to Blue Mountain. Like, something's going to happen where she's going to serve him a drink and he's going to go drive in this sports car he's rented, and he's going to hit somebody, and it's either going to cause a death or a catastrophic accident, which then is going to affect her job in the bar. And that's what's going to cause this deterioration of this partnership. That there's guilt felt on all sides of this situation. And I was
Mhm.
like, I could see something like that. That's where I thought it was going. But I also was like, okay, I also could see this going in a more misread kiss situation
Mhm.
as well. Like, I was like, it's either going to be the
Yeah.
drunk driving, or it's going to be, or it's going to be a romantic misread.
Yeah, predictable is a
So
Yeah.
word I would use to describe this play, and the fact that you had two possibilities and indeed it was one of them, like I think that kind of says a bit here.
well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, but I mean,
Yeah.
overall, I really did enjoy the piece, and I enjoyed it for its grayness in the sense, like as I said, this wasn't a clear black and white situation until after the kiss happens, and then obviously Ben is in the wrong with how he reacts and how he treats Julie. But up until that moment, you could easily read and direct this play in so many different ways of reading those
Mhm.
situations, that I enjoyed that element of it. That everything leading up to the situation was great. After the situation, the playwright was very clear of no, Ben has now stepped over the line, and this is a spiraling situation that's gone from bad to like it's gone from a bad situation to an even worse situation.
I want to
So
also, yeah, add in reading in the program note too, and I believe this was coming from Louise, our playwright, and also Julie, of like
mhm,
this play analyzing, like, as humans, like
mhm,
we all have lightness, but in the
mhm,
flick of a switch, we have darkness in us as well. And I also just think, again, talking about how the beautifulness of like just these like raw, jovial characters sharing their lives. But then they do pepper in like the depth, and we get little tidbits of their past and the loss that they've experienced. And then, absolutely, I think that idea of we can go from light to we all have a darkness inside of us, that is absolutely augmented when the deed happens. Like, there was almost like I had goosebumps on my body, the switch that Vern did for Ben, of like, oh, this Santa Claus, barfly guy who gives you big tips. And then he is sitting at the table, knuckles curled, and the way he's delivering his text is very dark. But again, it wasn't over the top theatricalized. It was just, again, like sussing out in it could take a deed, it could take a moment, it could take a phrase where you go from light to dark. And as humans, how do we navigate that? When do we apologize and accept people back? When do we repel? This piece says a really good sort of like question asker about life at the end of the piece, of us really focusing in on the relationships we share with even like the day-to-day common folks, you know? I don't know. That's kind of like a little bit of a soupy summation, but
soup. I like it. If I could piggyback off of some of the things that both of you have kind of said, and maybe
round us out, Ryan. Bring us home.
I think, Mac, you kind of called this a Chekhov's gun a moment ago, but I think it's actually there's a different playwright that comes to mind. It's David Mamet, not a great person, but interesting figure nonetheless. Where in almost all of Mamet's plays, there's a concept that's brought up early on, usually in like the first scene or the first conversation, that is scholars sort of point to these as this is the skeleton key to understanding what this play is secretly about. In Glengarry Glen Ross, it's always be closing, introduced in the first scene, and then you can kind of read the whole play through that sort of prism. In Oleana, it's terms of art. And it doesn't necessarily come in the first scene, but I think I located the single little phrase that this entire play is about, and it's duty of care. And what happens when care becomes a duty. And I think that is where this play sort of pivots. And it's, Mac, you called it a Chekhov's gun that you mentioned earlier that, I wrote down like in my notebook the actual exact line, even before I realized that it was going to get a payoff, but just because I recognized that like this feels important to what this play is about. And it kind of like came up in an awkward context that didn't necessarily feel like it felt like it was going somewhere thematically. And it was that, quote, duty of care puts an awful lot of responsibility on the server. And they're talking about someone who like sued the hotel because of like, I forget what it was, like a fire or some sort of incident.
Falls out the window.
Falls out a window. That's what it was.
Which was, once again, after this whole One Direction thing this week, was like,
right, yeah,
oh.
Right, yeah, I didn't even think of that. Yeah, but like this idea of the duty of care and how the server, who's really just there to do her job, is responsible for the people. And that's why it's the hospitality business, is these are your patrons, and in this way. And this is a play about the care that these two people have for each other, but that care is a duty. She is legally responsible for him when he is in the institution, and he cares for her. I can take care of you by giving you money. That he feels like it's his duty as her future husband in his mind to take care of her in this way. And it is the fact that when it becomes a duty, it ceases to be care in like an actual like emotional sense, that even if those emotions still exist, that the actual responsibility that you have for this other person overrides those feelings, or has the potential to. And and when he makes his big faux pas and she tells him, sit down, stay, don't go. And then he tells his gross story about sexually harassing his high school peers. And then she gives him the water and says, your cab is here. When he comes back the next day for his poetry reading, he's like, you told me not to go. You feel the same way. And she's like, no, I'm legally responsible to make sure you don't die in a car crash. That's all it was. And that is like the Chekhov's gun firing, that sort of revelation at the end. But I think that idea of duty of care is at its core what this play is about. And
wow. No, just like duty of care and hospitality, but also duty of care. Kind of what I just talked about of like, what are our relationships? And like when, as humans, we communicate, but like we're not effective communicators most of the time, and we're not mind readers. So it's like, for no pun intended, you got to lay it all out on the table. Anyways, our cups are on the table. Should that round it out, and should we raise our glasses on this one?
I think so, Jill. Let's round out for the night. And we'll see everybody in part 2. Before we go, let's all give our classic sign-offs. Ryan, where can people follow you?
No point in trying to find and follow me, but if you like me and my theater thoughts, they tend to live here on The Cup. It's at COH Theater on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or Cup of Hemlock Theater on YouTube, where you might be watching this, Cup of Hemlock Theater podcast, and all the podcast places where you might be listening to this. That's me. How about you guys?
All rights reserved. That pace was amazing. Yes, folks can find and follow me at my artist Instagram account at Jillian.Robinson96. Post some covers of things, trying to get into some photo shooty stuff. Just go there and keep up with your girl, Jill. That's me. Back.
Fun. You can follow me at Mackenzie Horner, all social media platforms. Follow my musical antics over at Before the Downbeat, a musical podcast. We are now in the midst of releasing season 6, and Ryan will be on one of those episodes this season. Right. So you want to be keeping an eye on that to find out which, musical I've roped Ryan into covering this time. Hint, it's not Fiddler on the Roof. We've talked enough about that musical.
Zero Mostel may make an appearance.
That is true. There we go. All right. Thank you, everybody. Stay healthy, stay safe, and stay tuned later this week for part 2 as we round up the last 3 shows of the Next Stage Festival. Thank you. Bye.
Cheers, folks.